First of all, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
You're back in Toronto. Is it nice to be back? It's a bit gray today. It's not quite warm enough. What are you feeling?
Well, it is good to be back, and honestly, we're actually both born and raised on the west coast of Canada,
Right.
originally from Victoria, BC. So this gray, rainy weather feels very homey. We feel welcome back. Welcome back to Canada.
I woke
Yes.
up this morning, I was like, training.
Yeah.
Sweet.
It feels good.
Here we go.
You miss weather in Los Angeles because there isn't any ever. But yeah, we relocated to LA, I guess, a year and a half ago now. And it's been great so far. We just found that, especially with our trailer work, it was getting to be pretty important that we were closer to the people we were working with, because as you can imagine with trailer work, the non-disclosure agreements are a mile high, and nobody likes letting footage leave their editing suite. So a lot of our early trailer work, believe it or not, was just done via email description. So
Wow.
they would reach out and be like, it's got the descriptive words too. They'd be like, at 10 seconds it has to be exciting, at 12 seconds it has to be swag. At 13 seconds, absolute silence, and then 14, like action and drama. And so you kind of work from that. It's, as you can imagine, much easier when you get to sit and watch what they're talking about. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, we'll get to some of the sort of origins for the projects, but I just kind of feel like that's a good place to start talking about vocabulary and language.
Yeah.
And so much of it is fascinating about as musicians trying to develop some kind of common vocabulary with people who are not musicians.
Yes, very much so. That's been the name of the game. It's something that is probably one of the most challenging parts about what we do. It's always very refreshing to work with a director or a music supervisor who has a music background and will say things like tempo or rhythm or even melody or whatever and mean sort of what they say. A lot of professionals who are very good at what they do don't have that vocabulary and will sort of like make it up as they go. So it can be quite challenging in that regard. I'm not joking when I say swag. We've gotten that note several times on pieces of music that are
Doesn't
like, we
mean anything.
love it, but like, could we get like 8% more swag?
Yes.
And we're like, oh God. Hip hop drums? Like, what do you want? So it's also great because the more that we work with certain directors or certain music supervisors, the more that we can understand their understanding of music language, and it helps us.
Yeah. You sort of get a creative brief in advertising as well, right? They give you just like certain keywords, and like I actually went to school for advertising before doing this, and so a lot of my job in that was deciphering and creating creative briefs. So like having that knowledge to be like, okay, I think this is what they're thinking of.
Yeah.
Sort of puts us in a better spot.
Another
with
way
that.
that it helps having three of us too, because oftentimes we'll all get off a phone call and then speak to each other and realize we all got different things from it. And we're like, okay, where's the middle ground? That's probably what they actually meant.
So what's it been like this transition? I mean, you all, the three of you grow up really like very deep into music and playing and even starting to make your own music. Was it a very sort of early going thing for you?
It's when we first got our opportunity to make music for a film, which was the movie Extraterrestrial, which came to us via a music video director, actually, now film director, who got his first money to make a film. But it was kind of like taking the restraints off a little bit, because if you're trying to write music that would fall in the category of punk or rock in any sort of pop category, there are some constraints in terms of the types of tempos and beats, the kind of song arrangement, verse, chorus, that sort of thing. Then all of a sudden we were put in a situation where you could create music, and the only guideline was like, does it accomplish the mood?
Right.
So that was very freeing, actually. So for us, I think that it felt kind of maybe surprisingly natural to us at the time of just being like, we can just make weird sounds. And if they scare people, we did our job. Like, that's awesome.
I mean, because I'm getting interested. I mean, were you sort of obviously movie fans too? I mean, was there a point where you started to become more conscious of this whole kind of field of sort of film music?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of it. Like, we got the call from Colin, and he had been paired with, I guess, a composer that the studio put him with. He was not happy with how that situation was going, and we got this panic phone call. It was like, I need you to score my movie. And it was like, no problem. Yeah.
And then crippling anxiety.
Yeah, then like hang up the phone, literally Google how to score a movie.
Yeah. I watched YouTube videos on how to score a film.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can learn on YouTube, I'm telling you. And we had maybe the musical knowledge, but not the literal knowledge of like, we had questions like, can you open a movie in Logic so you can make music to a video file? Like, we didn't know. So there was a lot of very, very steep learning curve there.
So I'm curious too. I think probably people here are very curious, but certainly when you start talking about these like major Hollywood films and these big projects that you were getting involved with, especially at the trailer stage. I mean, how did that shift in your career start to happen towards getting those sorts of phone calls or those emails?
Yeah, it was a tumultuous time for us. This is years ago now, and we had made, as I mentioned, sort of like some more straight up sort of punk records, and we'd had a record deal that had sort of come and gone, and a band that had come and gone, and we were in the midst of reinventing ourselves. We got this call to do the music for Extraterrestrial. In the meantime, we made an instrumental record, which we'd also never done before. And it just so happened that that music got in the hands of somebody who passed it to somebody who passed it to somebody. And there's a woman named Marcy Buckley who's been a huge supporter of us, who used to be a music supervisor at a trailer house called Wildcard in Los Angeles. And she heard potential somehow in what we were doing to create music for the movie The Girl on the Train, which is our first big trailer project. And basically, we got the call to like create this custom piece of orchestral music. So we did, and we made it, you know, all their reference points. It had to be sexy, it had to be dark, it had to be, you know, scary, but it all has to be, you know, all these things. Took our best shot at it, and they loved it. And then we got the call that was, you know, we love it, guys, but we talked to the client, and we're gonna have to get Kanye on it. And it was literally on the phone call, like there was a pause, and I was like, I don't have his number. Like, do you? Oh, no, he's already approved. This is like a thing. Yeah. So they sent us all his vocal stems, and we chopped up from the song Heartless and put it over this piece that we had made. But yeah, basically that was this crash course in movie trailers, really in a lot of ways, because the put a rapper on it conversation or the swag stuff or whatever, it was all encompassing. And we did, God, like hundreds of versions of that song.
They chose the first version.
Yeah. I forgot that, it's true. We did so many revisions, adding train sound effects.
They went back to the first one.
And then, they were like, we got it, guys, thank you for, and we heard it, and it's literally the first one we sent. But it does happen. The amazing thing about that is that it created this total shift in our careers at that point, because it opened up, not only did we want to be scoring films for sure, but then there was this whole other way to make music creatively and make money from it and have this other career path. And because that company, Wildcard, is very aggressive when it comes to like awards season, that campaign won a bunch of trailer awards, which looks like we won awards. So that pretty much got us our visas and got us into the US, basically, and created this kind of domino effect of the other movie trailers we've got to work on.
And it's interesting, I was going to have a good time to shift to Aaron, too, because I think Aaron is interesting because he's an actor making his own shift to filmmaking now. And as an actor, he had worked on The Void, which was one of your
That's
great
how we were connected in the first place,
And what was it like, sort of, I mean, what was your, impressions of them, or kind of what got you interested in working with them, actually were thinking about them when you were going to come to your own film?
I mean, I think we just connected through Instagram after sharing collaboration separately on The Void. And I think you guys knew that I was interested in making my own stuff and just made an open offer. And it was that generosity, actually, that made me think of them first when it came time to make my first short. And I sent you guys a rough cut early on, I think, that you watched. And then we met on Skype and just started jamming out the core values and ideas for the story.
So what were some of the musical starting points? Well, just to give you a bit of background on Oracle, it's very creepy. It's a really something, a hugely a big favorite for us at the Shorts. But yeah, it's also like there's barely any dialogue. It's a very spare piece. So I think music and sound design play possibly an outsized role in the film. But it's also not something where there is a lot of either one. Like you have a lot of quiet, you have a lot of stillness within that too.
Yeah.
I knew that sound design and score would sort of braid themselves through the project. I didn't know the extent to which silence would, but I knew that I didn't want to indicate strongly. And so in our first meeting, I talked about the instruments that I didn't want to hear. I knew I wanted to avoid nostalgia because I think that a move towards a Carpenter sound really does activate a longing for, our youth, and that for me takes people out of an immediate participation in the film, which can sometimes be good, but nostalgia didn't play a role for me. And so we talked about the things we didn't want, and then based on your screening of the film, what you guys had seen in it. And so we were aligned in a sense of dread, but also a sense of almost like a spiritual or transcendent awe that the child might experience by the end of the film. And so we talked about the beats, the building blocks that would move towards that.
And you can hear, as Aaron speaks about it as well, one of the reasons he was such a pleasure to work with is it's not just I need Hans Zimmer, or I need this, or I need whatever. The way that he would speak about music and think very intelligently about it had more to do with the emotions that were present and the cliches we wanted to avoid, which is a wonderful space to play in as a musician, because you get to really create your own world. And one of the things, actually, it's interesting you mentioning that it's really creepy. I actually firmly believe that for large parts of the film, if you were to close your eyes and listen to the music, you would think maybe it was like a pleasant religious film or something. Because there's maybe the odd creepy cue, but for the most part, it's these open, major scale evolutions that I think, this is one of the things Aaron identified early on, that he didn't want the music to play for scares or, without spoiling anything in the film, there's a few images that can be quite creepy, but these should be played as this, like, they're scary in the way of this unknown probability in the future, but they're not just like trying to make you afraid. So one thing I really enjoyed about Oracle is I think that in some ways the visual and the music are telling two different stories that combine to make a more complex picture, I think.
There really is, like, I mean, if you're thinking about the space of a film or what's in the frame or where the characters are, that does become a limit. You're just using stuff in that environment. Like,
Very
I
much
think
so.
about like a lot of the Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross scores really play with that, where it's like starts with the vacuum cleaner in the scene, then it becomes music.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. And that's something that I think, especially in genre film, the line between sound design and score is very, very blurry. And actually something maybe that Aaron can speak to a little bit, because that was a big part of Oracle as well, and your sounds that you discovered.
Yeah, so in the edit we realized that an orbital sander, an electric sander, was something that was going to feature sort of off camera in the awareness of the kid, and I realized that the low note on that sander was at about 125 hertz. So we kind of geeked out on the math a little bit, and there's a nightmare that the kid experiences, and we wanted to take what was a source recording of the sander and turn it into sort of a fever dream siren. And so we started with, and I spoke with the guys about a low note at 40 hertz and the sander siren rising up to 125, so that they could build that out organically and have the score meet the escape, then that would be helpful to the image. So you can kind of geek out on the math, but the final effect is this sort of emotional seamlessness that helped elevate the experience of the kid into something a little nightmarish.
It must be, kind of great to be able to balance this kind of collaboration, this kind of relationship where you really are getting on that same page versus the situation where maybe you have 15, 20 people in the proverbial room that are all going to have things to bring. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to work on this kind of project where we can focus in this way and keep. Always, it's nice with collaboration I love having multiple voices in a room, and they really do make things better. But it's like to a point, and a level of trust and communication is so important. So, Dean and Tristan and myself have been playing together since we were very young. But it's wonderful when we meet a director, and we feel this way about many of the people we've collaborated with, where it just kind of clicks in a way where the four of us can just excitedly jam on ideas and create something together. The spirit of that kind of collaboration doesn't feel very foreign to us, because that's what we always used to do to write music as a band too. We would get in a jam space with a bunch of people playing our instruments and make a lot of weird noise that turned into a song eventually. It's a similar kind of approach, just the extra band member is a director.
We've got some time for questions too. So we have, if anyone has questions in mind for our folks on stage, stand, and there will be a microphone coming your way as well. Are there other questions? Oh, sure. I'd stand up and just...
Hey there, I'm just wondering actually if you could talk a little bit about how you manage your creative differences in your group, because that's traditionally something that bands and musical collaborations struggle with over long periods of time.
Physical brawls.
Pool cue.
Yeah, just there's only two openings.
Yeah. We're on the same page a lot of the time.
But it's hard earned, because like we fought for sure for a long time. But you got to keep in mind we've been working with each other since we were teenagers. So I feel like living in a van together for so long and playing thankless, bar shows and then getting out and it's Winnipeg and it's -30 and you're like, F you, man, at each other. You get it all out. So by the time now we're living in Los Angeles and we have like a home there with a studio and everything, and we don't have a lot to fight. We fight about stuff, but it's more like, Dean took the coffee before I had a chance to get some.
Front coffee.
What were you thinking? When it comes to creative differences, though, really, the rule that we kind of operate on is that we need to unanimously like something. So there are many times when two of us will be like, this is great, and a third one's like, I don't get it, and we will not move forward with it, which can be a real pain. But always that thing will get better by admitting that it's not as good as it could be, making the third person happy, and then by the time the three of us are like, I think this is something special, it usually doesn't suck.
You talked a bit about the importance of instrumentation and knowing exactly like the instruments and what you're limiting your palette from the very beginning. So how important would it be to establish the genre, not necessarily the instrumentation, but the genre of music that you fall into?
Yeah, I think that's vital. I mean, it comes back to a question that Jason asked earlier about the necessity of limiting yourself. And you were talking to us before about a Brian Eno quote about this, right? Which pertains to the same kind of idea, which is that it's very important, almost the most important, to limit yourself early on. Because at least the way that I work creatively, I kind of get excited about something and we'll just like be throwing ideas out and making stuff, and a lot of it won't make sense. And if there's no limits, then I'll just go and create something. Guy. He's the limits guy. He's like, nope.
Pull him down.
Yeah, which is incredibly helpful. I would say it's something we've learned the hard way by running in too many directions and creating more work than we needed to, and making something more muddled and less effective. That our first foot forward is always defining specifically not just the genre, but in our case specifically, like here's the synths we're allowed to use, here's the strings and the reverbs we're allowed to use, and here's the sets of percussion. So no matter what we do within that world, we know we're not straying too far from the texture that we want to be a part of the story.
So just an extension of that previous question, I wonder if there's an aesthetic that the band tries to bring to each project, because maybe the director puts on limitations, which today are, it needs to be super orchestral.
Right.
And tomorrow it needs to be very 80s synth. And you're like, who am I? Am I just,
what am I doing?
Doing what he tells me to do? How do you bring your own flavor to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that I like to hope that the way that the three of us naturally think about chords and melody, the stuff that we're going to be making sort of sounds like something that Blitz Berlin would do, I guess. But there is absolutely a balance needed between being willing to be kind of a chameleon, because of course if you're doing a rom-com and then a horror movie, you don't want one to be scary, and they need to be quite different. But I think that there's a natural approach to sound, the types of gear we use, the way that we mix and everything, that I hope makes our score sound like something that is still from the core of the band.
Yeah, it's also like I think probably like 90% of the jobs we've gotten because like they wanted something that was like Blitz Berlin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was just sort of one
that
of those
girl
things
on the train trailer turned into that several. The reason we got the 50 Shades movies is because somebody called somebody and was like, we want the girl on the train thing, and somebody's like, I know those guys. So that's how that came about. Yeah. So if we're lucky enough to make work that gets noticed, then that tends to be how jobs come to us, and they're already coming to us expecting something about what we sound like.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're sadly out of time for the session, but we'll have some time for a meet and greet after this. But I'd like to thank Martin and Tristan and Aaron for coming.
Thanks for having us. Thanks very much.